I'm recording now to the cloud, and just in terms of the recording itself, just welcoming Peter McNamara from the Sydney Conservatorium of Music to speak to us today about his project, De Rerum Natura, the Latin Song Cycle project. So please join me in welcoming Peter. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks very much, everybody, for allowing me to speak today. So first of all, a few thank yous firstly. So obviously thank you to the association for the funding support. Also thanks to Paul as well. And I hear that you're stepping down, so enjoy a bit of extra free time, I suppose, Paul. And Francis isn't on the call today, but I would still like to acknowledge Francis for suggesting and facilitating my contact with the Classical Association. So thank you to Francis as well. So let's get to the project. So this was actually a question by Francis, actually. Why Lucretius? So this is the background to the project of my song cycle. So it was back in 2018, so it was 3 years ago now. I was teaching students at the Conservatorium High School about the Sanctus musical form, and me just being you know, a composer, I guess. This led to some questions regarding things like, you know, translation of the words of the Sanctus, the pronunciation of it. Those kind of questions kind of sort of came up for me. And this also led to me researching, you know, some significant Latin texts that that were out there, and that's where De Rerum Natura come up for you know, for me during that period of research. And continuing on the same theme, I always had an interest in scientific theory and the formation of the universe, those kind of topics. And I was just struck by the amazingly highly advanced understanding that there actually is of subatomic theory and formation of the universe in Lucretius's text. It was really quite astonishing for me. And that, given this newly found interest in Latin that I had through my teaching, I just felt compelled to actually set portions of this text to music. And from what I could gather, it had never been set to music before as well. So that was another interesting point for me. So step one for me was to actually read the entire translation, which is quite a long document. It took me a while, but I got through it. And I was using an online library called the Perseus Library, which is made available through an American university called Tufts University. So I was able to get access to the document through that. Then the next step was to select some portions from each book that were firstly interesting and secondly not too long. There's quite a lot of very long passages in it, so it took a while to find some appropriate sections. And then the next step was work out the pronunciation, which for me was a little bit of a quagmire, not having a background in this myself. But I decided very early on that I wanted to use pronunciation that would have been as close as possible to how the language would have been spoken actually in ancient Rome. And as I said, I found this a little bit difficult to nail down and came across ecclesiastic pronunciation, etc. But I eventually discovered the book Vox Latina by Allen, which was very helpful, and that informed my pronunciation protocols, I guess, for the work. So the classical pronunciation was what I settled on, and this was quite challenging for my vocalist, and largely that's because of an unfamiliarity, I guess, with that type of pronunciation. And most vocalists in music, particularly classical music, most commonly come across Latin, for example, in sacred works like the Requiem or the Sanctus or whatever, like I mentioned before. And generally, they go with ecclesiastic pronunciation in that circumstance. it's a little bit different for my vocalist to get used to, I guess. So firstly, let's have a bit of a look at each of the songs. So 6 songs overall, and they've all just got the title of Lucretius's books, so just Liber Primus, etc. So that's our first song, Liber Primus, and this was composed in the second half of 2018, so just about 3 years ago. And for this song, I settled on voice and guitar or harp. I've made the instrumentation free, so it could be a couple of different instruments just to make it a bit more accessible. But by this stage, I hadn't completely settled on what the instrumentation would be. I just knew it would be voice and something small. So the character of the first song is very flowy. And the musical material is influenced by the medieval music genre. And the reason for that is to be a little bit deceptive. I'll go into that in a bit more detail in a moment. And the lines of text that I decided to use were 62 to 101 and 136 to 45. And they're outlining Epicurus's defiance of religion, and that's, you know, in line with Lucretius's skepticism. And also the sacrifice of Agamemnon's daughter. So the reason for medieval influence in this, as I said, was with regards to this idea of deception. And the example below here that I've got on the screen is an example of the antiphon Salve Regina. And this is commonly what many people would think about when hearing a Latin text set to music. So obviously it's a religious text written in a medieval mode. So it doesn't use the major minor system that we use in common practice music nowadays and from classical music. And the idea of doing this, as I said, was meant to deceptively invoke, you know, this reaction in my own song, given the contrasting theme of Lucretius's text. So I've got just a quick excerpt of this antiphon just to play. So going on to the next slide. So what I did in my first song here was to create a chord progression in each different type of medieval mode. So there's 7 overall. Really only 6 of them were used, but there's 7 overall. So they're known as Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, etc. So one of each of those modes. And here's a few examples of what they sound like. They often sound a little bit different to what we're used to in music nowadays. So the coloured portion of the keyboard that I've got there, that indicates the pitches that are in the particular scale I'm talking about. And this first one is just known as C major. It's just all of the white notes on a keyboard instrument. And that's also known as the Ionian scale. It's the same scale, which sounds like this. So that's our C major scale, but some other different ones. So for example, this one is known as the Dorian scale, and it's just got a slightly different color. So just a little bit darker. And then another one again. So you can see here, this one has 4 of those black notes on the piano, and quite darker again. And this is known as the Phrygian scale. All right, so a few excerpts. So in the first section of this song, the chords that I derived for this, they're all mixed up. There's a system that I use to put them all together still, so they still sound quite coherent, but they're all mixed up and they're not in the original order, so they do sound a little bit unsettled, I guess is the word used to describe it. And the system I used for the setting the music with the words, in this particular case, there's one chord for each word that's used in the text. There's one or two exceptions here. There's, you know, not always the same amount of words as there is bits of musical material. So every now and then there might be 2 words per piece of musical material or something like that. But for the most part, it's 1 word per chord in this particular case. And again, I've got an excerpt here. So that's from the start of that first one. And in the final section of this first song, what I did was use the chords in their original order that I derived them. And this is used in a very, very similar texture to the antiphon that I played you before. And if you have a look at the music excerpt there, you can probably see it's actually quite similar to that. And sounds quite similar too, only that there's basically a bit of guitar accompaniment underneath. All right, so let's move to the second song now. So Liber Secundus. So this one was composed back in 2019, first half of 2019. This is the only one that's actually been performed as well with COVID and the like. Anyway, this one, slightly different instrumentation. So we have voice again, of course, but we also have recorder in the recording. Can also be performed by flute as well. And we also have percussion. Now this one's quite different. It's very rhythmically driven and tense, so not so flowing as the first one, just for some contrast. And this one is actually influenced by ancient Greek musical practices. And the reason for ancient Greek is that it reflects most likely what the sound of music in the Roman Republic would have been. We don't know exactly what it would have been like, but we imagine it would have been something very similar to ancient Greek musical practices. And that's because the Romans actually didn't have their own musical practice, and they actually employed foreigners as musicians. And often they were Greeks, but often Etruscans as well. But generally they would have had a very, very similar sound to what ancient Greek music would have sounded like. And we do have quite a lot of information about ancient Greek music. So the lines of text are 165 to 80, 294 to 307, and 381 to 97, outlining subjects such as the movement of matter, changing seasons, that kind of thing, and asserting that there's no divine power that puts those things into motion. Okay, so pitch material in this song, as I said, was based on ancient Greece musical practices. And Music in ancient Greece was based on what we call in music tetrachords. And a tetrachord is just a group of 4 pitches, and you can see them marked up on the keyboard there. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Now the tetrachord was always the same width, and it was always what we call in music a fourth in overall width. And you could then fill in the gaps in between that fourth in various ways, and it was permissible to change the pitches that were in the middle, but the ones on either side were always fixed and stayed the same. So this is the first type, and this is probably the most common type. And in this one, there's in music what we call a half step to begin with. So a half step means there's no other note in between. You're going up a step, but there's no other note in between. And then 2 full steps. So you can see there's a full step between these 2 notes, but there's a note in between, that black note, which is skipped, if you like. So that's what we call a full step. So yeah, we've got half step, then full step and full step. Another type was this one, and you can see there the 2 outer pitches are the same, they don't move, but the middle ones have changed here. And for this one, we've got 2 half steps. So half step, and then because we're going from there to there now, that black note to this top note, that's 1.5 steps. So the pattern is half, 1.5 for this particular one. And the last one I'm going to show you, which is one that I really like because we actually can't show it on a modern keyboard because there's actually a note that's used in between these 2 notes on the keyboard. And that's called a microtonal pitch. Right, so it actually doesn't exist in our tuning system nowadays. And the steps for these are actually quarter, then there's 2 steps between that note and that note. So it's still a tetrachord. So we've got 1 note here, then another note in between these 2, then that 3rd pitch there, and then the top pitch there. So that's 4 altogether. So then for my song, what I did was I stuck together a whole heap of these tetrachords, and they're all different, but in ancient Greek musical practice, they used to use the same tetrachord and repeat the same tetrachord to make musical systems and scales and that sort of thing. So the first one, each of the tetrachords is built subsequently on the top pitch. So we've got the first tetrachord here, then the second tetrachord here, and that's built from the top pitch of the first one, and so on and so forth. And in the second system, the tetrachords are just separated by an extra step. So we've got the tetrachord, then an extra step, then the next tetrachord, then an extra step, then the next tetrachord, etc. So this second one ends up being quite a bit higher than the first one. That's the main difference between the 2. And again, I've got a couple of excerpts so you can hear the difference. So this is the first one, which is used in section 1, and then the last section as well in the second song, sorry. So that's that first system. And then this is the second one. So that gives you an idea of the different sound between the two of them. You can probably hear they both sound a little bit kind of ancient. And that second one's much more rhythmically driven and is a real tongue twister, actually, for the vocalist as well. It goes quite fast. But she did an amazing job, Chloe. So let's move on to the third song, which is possibly stretching the definition to actually call it a song, but I'll explain what I mean in a moment. So this was composed in late 2019, and it's mostly voice and recorder or flute. The recording is recorder, but mostly voice and recorder. There's a little bit of percussion at the start and end of it though. Now this one is much more free and improvised, and it's actually influenced by an ancient Greek poetry reading form where a poetry reciter was accompanied by what was known as an aulos player, and I'll explain what an aulos is in a moment. Now, most likely this form was probably not used in the Roman Republic, but I still thought it was quite interesting, so I decided to incorporate it in the song cycle regardless. And in this one, the vocalist actually recites the text. And the recorder player actually plays two recorders simultaneously. So that's one in each hand, which is an interesting effect. And the lines used in this song was 417 to 44 and 1076 to 94, just outlining Lucretius's outline of the mortality of the soul, that kind of thing. All right, so why two recorders? Well, as I was saying, this was to emulate the use of the ancient Greek aulos, which is a double pipe, basically. And it was played, as you can see there in the picture there, that's a picture from found on a ceramic dish, I think, in an archaeological dig. There's one pipe in each hand. And if you have a look on the left there, I wish I had taken a photo of Chloe's reaction when she first saw Alicia put two recorders in her mouth. It was absolutely priceless, but I managed to snap this one while she was having a good laugh. But you can see there, Alicia's got two recorders there, one in each hand in her mouth. I don't know how she fit them both in, but there you have it. So that was the idea of using two recorders simultaneously to get that kind of effect. And Alicia, in a very improvised way, I tell her what pitches that she needs to play in each one, but she just plays them in a very improvised manner. And so you've got two different, if you like, voices played simultaneously by Alicia in the recorders there.
Principio quoniam tenuam constare minutis corporibus doqui mutoque minoribus essen principiis factam quam liquidus humor aquae aut nebula aut fumus nam longe mobilitate prestat et a tenui causa magis ictamo etu quippe ubi imaginibus fumi nebulaeque moetur.
So that gives you an idea. That's from the middle. The start and end are a little bit different. They're a bit more structured, but that middle section is very, very free, as you can hear there. We move on to the fourth song now, and I'll just briefly mention the fourth and fifth songs. They've got a lot of similarities to the first and second, actually, so I won't dwell too much on these. But this one was in the first half of 2020, getting close to the lockdown here, not quite, but getting close. And this one was voice, guitar, or harp. Again, it's guitar in the recording and percussion. So guitar comes back for this one. And this one relates to Liber Primus, so the very first one, in terms of the musical material, but it's more disjointed and rhythmically tense. And that's a bit more of the character, if you like, of the second song. So musical material of the first, but character of the second here, just to change things up and for some contrast. So again, those medieval modes return in the middle section here. and using lines 230 to 68, describing senses of the body, particularly sight and touch. So that gives you an idea of the fourth one. And again, just quickly, the fifth song, Liber Quintus. By this stage, we're getting into the lockdown. That's when this was composed. So first half again of 2020, voice, guitar, and recorder in this particular one. So each of them have a slightly different instrumentation, which is the idea. So this one relates in terms of its musical material to the second song. So using that, the ancient Greek modes again, but it has that flowing character of the first song, again, just for some contrast. The middle section probably is a little bit more rhythmically unsettled, but that's the general kind of character of it. This was my favorite bit of Lucretius, describing the formation of the universe and the sun, earth, moon, etc. And this was one where I read through this and thought, gee, that's actually not that far, you know, from what our current understanding is of the formation of the universe. Is pretty close, which was I thought was quite amazing. So again, that gives you an idea. It's got more of that flowing character of the first song, but using the material from the second. And then lastly, we get to Liber Sextus. So we're right in the lockdown at this stage. Yeah, so again, first half of 2020, I think it was around sort of April, May, that kind of period. Now this is the only song which uses the entire ensemble. So we've got in the recording, voice, guitar, recorder, and my mate Brad back on percussion. It relates to the third one in that it's quite improvised, but different character. It's very sorrowful and even apocalyptic towards the ending, and uses quite often what we call approximate pitch. So I haven't actually specified what pitch the performers are to play or sing at various points, but that's apart from the ending, which is different. I'll get to that in a minute. So it uses the very ending of the text, so lines 1247 to the end, and that's Lucretius's apocalyptic description of the Athens plague. And I actually chose that before the pandemic, but it actually ended up working out quite well given the circumstances. We had this little bit of a quandary with lines 1247 to 52. Where do they actually belong? So do they belong where they were found, or were they meant to be put somewhere else? But from what I could gather, the consensus seems to be, and I could be wrong, but from what I could gather, it seemed to be that those 5 lines were meant to be the ending. And so I decided to go with that, and that's what seemed to make sense with those 5 lines of text for me anyway. I'm not sure, maybe someone else might have a different opinion on that, but they just seem to fit better at the end. So that was what I went with. But I did decide very carefully to make it different in terms of its musical texture to the remainder of that song. So those 5 lines are quite different. So the remainder of the text, I divided line by line with the first of every 6th line. It's because there's 6 songs in the cycle overall. So the first of every 6th line is very, very freely sung. And that's after the vocalist tunes themselves to the pitch of a bowed cymbal. And I'll explain that in a moment. And then the preceding 5 lines after that use a different texture that's approximate in its pitch, as I was mentioning before, and it uses the rhythm of the text itself. So, bowing a cymbal. My colleague Brad has lots of fun doing this. We spent a whole day doing this one day, just working out the different sounds and the like that you can get from bowing a cymbal. So it's actually possible to draw a bow from a string instrument like a violin or a cello across a metallic percussion instrument, and some other instruments too, actually. But it works particularly well on metallic instruments like cymbals and gongs and vibraphone bars, for example. And what happens when you bow a cymbal is you end up with particular pitches that are part of the cymbal's acoustics actually emerging from the cymbal. You'll hear it when I play the excerpt. It's quite a different sound, but it can actually differ what pitches you get, and that's kind of the idea with this last song. So you could get pitches coming from anywhere that the vocalist has to tune to. So those can be changed with regards to where you actually draw the bow across the instrument, the angle of the bow. You can also touch various points. So if you look at the picture there, the performer's actually touching the cymbal at that particular point there. But if you change where you touch the cymbal, you'll get different pitches as well. So there's quite a large number of different sonorities that you can get when doing this. And this is what the notation of that looks like. So you can see down here, this is the cymbal. That's the cymbal for the cymbal to bow. And then after that, the vocalist tunes themselves to the pitch that's coming out from the bowed cymbal. And then you can see that there's a little bit of contour, either up or down as to where the vocalist should go with their pitches. And then after that, so this is the approximate pitch notation. So you can see there's 3 lines there, low, medium, and high. So approximately where, the pitches are. So this one's sort of in the lower medium kind of register. That's approximately where the singer or instrumentalist should sing or play their particular pitch.